Hello, and welcome to the fifth step in attaining an enlightened mind and learning to transcend stress and suffering. Now, this particular step I added, it's not in the original ancient tradition, but it would fall under the category of mind, and under mind, memory. And so, in that sense, remember, this is very, very important. As Eckhart Tolle has put it, the single most important step on your journey towards enlightenment is this: learn to disidentify from your mind, from that sports commentator calling the game of your life. Only unlike a sports commentator, he's actually influencing the game of your life. He's calling it and he's guiding it and he's directing it. So that's where we have a chance to intervene. And this step, before I get into it, takes me back to my first years in graduate school. It was an exciting time, and I remember taking one of my first courses was in rational emotive therapy, also later known as rational behavior therapy, who was founded by the great renowned psychologist Albert Ellis. And I've mentioned this before, we'll just touch on it briefly with a little twist. So in any given situation, we have out here the activating event. And then we have in here the emotional consequence. So there's a point A and C. And we usually forget that there's something else in there, and that is point B, the beliefs, the story that we're telling ourselves about the event. So in this time, we're going to be talking about the story. And I want you to think about that. In the course of a day, we tell ourselves stories all the time about the events in our life. And I loved it, and I mentioned this earlier too, that as far back as 2,500 years ago, over that amount of time, Buddha had said that suffering's got two components, which he labeled as two arrows. The first arrow is the event. And the second arrow is the internal reaction to the event. Now, we can always do something about the internal reaction. We can't always do something about the event. Sometimes we can change certain situations or remove ourselves from them. So, in this instance, let's say you're at work and the boss is coming in your direction with a purposeful stride. Looks like he's got a slightly annoyed look on his face, and instantly that's A, the activating event, and it's C, you could be anxious. What are you telling yourself is a question in cognitive behavioral therapy. What are you telling yourself to make yourself anxious? In this case, I think the boss is going to fire me. I think I must have done something wrong, and my heart's beating faster and so forth. I'm really scared. Now, let's say same event, but the story you tell yourself is differently. You see the same event, the facial expression, the purposeful stride, only you're telling yourself, he looks like he's angry at me about something. You know, I've done a good job. I'm standing my ground. I'm not going to take it from him. I'm going to hold my ground. I don't know what he's going to blame me for, but I'm getting prepared for this. And in that case, you're feeling like an assertive feeling, perhaps an angry feeling, and you're going to back yourself up. So again, same event, different internal reaction. So in the course of a day, we're telling ourselves stories all the time. Now the key is to tell yourself a more effective, a better story for what's going on so that you can respond more effectively, kind of sticking with the facts. Let's take the stories that people may be telling themselves about COVID-19, about the coronavirus. They listen to the media, and next thing you know, they're scared. Oh my God, there's nothing I can do. It's going to go on forever, et cetera, et cetera. And then they're living with either a debilitating anxiety or a debilitating depression about the circumstances as they tell themselves the story. Now, instead, you might tell yourself the story, okay, I don't know what the future is. I do know there's some steps I can take to do hand washing, wear a mask, socially distance. And I'm just going to take it a day at a time, and we'll see what happens. I have heard there's vaccines that they're possibly going to come up with, and also for treatments that are getting more effective for those who get it. So, again, it's about the story. Now, think about this. As human beings, we are storytelling animals, if you will. Think about it. How much of your day is done involved with a story you're telling yourself about events? How much of your entertainment's involved with watching movies, films, shows? They're all stories. And the best movies are the ones that are told well as stories, really. So if you think about how central the story is, now the key here is we want to be able to say and realize I, that essential me, that deeper I, you and I, are not the story. So let's try our steps today. Breathing in, I am not the story, this story. Why? Because the story is changing all the time, and I am the unchanging element that is aware of the story. Now, breathing in, I am not this story. Why? Because I am the seer of the story, and the story is the scene. Just like we watch a movie, the story in a movie, the movie doesn't watch us as the audience. We watch it. We see it. Now, breathing in, I am not this story. Why? Because this story is known, and I am the knower. So the story doesn't know me, but I know it. Breathing in, I am not this story. Why? Because this story is experienced, and I am the experiencer. And as you look at the story is about me as a body-mind, that is the ego, the psychological self, having these experiences. But I, as the light of consciousness, am the witness of that. And in that place, as you learn to step out of your story, you can step into the glory of the paradise of your true nature as light of consciousness. A friend of mine as a life coach, had a patient one day, and she came up with this phrase. I loved it. And she said this, as the patient was going on and on about her story of woe of the week, and she was not getting to the goals they had set for this life coach session, which wasn't just a venting session, but was to get focused on things that she was supposed to be working on. So my friend, as a therapist, life coach, says, step out of your story and into your glory. So one way we handle stress and suffering is to change the story that we're dealing with, to a more effective story that we can be handling better, like what we tell ourselves about the coronavirus that enables us to not be paralyzed or debilitated by depression. Okay? So the other way to deal with stress and suffering is to transcend it. And that's what we mean by step out of your story and into your glory. So now, you can use that as an actual intervention during the day. Say to yourself, stop, and using the breathing in, cool, breathing out, calm, letting your jaw, tongue, and shoulders go limp, and feeling that wave of warmth and heaviness down through your body. And then you can go into, right now, breathing in, I step out of my story, exhale, and into my glory. Step out of my story and into my glory. And take a look from a centered position as to what you're telling yourself about the events in your life. So that's a very simple step you can take. Now, the other thing is, what's the consequence of staying identified with the story of your life? Now, we have all the little stories that add up, and then we have the story of me, of who and what I am and where I've been and what I've done. And so many people are trapped by their past rather than step out of that story that was developed in the past in memory, disidentifying from memory, and realizing from the place of consciousness, you have more power to alter the story and make it a more effective story for yourself. And really gaining some relief from that transcendent perspective. So What are the consequences of staying identified with your story? Now, this is the month of Halloween, and so there's movies on about hauntings here and there and so forth. And so literally, as I said in the book, if your shadow's in lead, that means your back is to the light. Or if my shadow's in lead, that means my back is to the light. In that, I relate some experiences I had that have to do with hauntings. And whether you believe this or not, there are people I've worked with who, when I use a kind of a slight regression technique and say, now, let that feeling take you back to an earlier time, another place where you felt the same way. That anxiety, let it take you back. Let that anger, let that phrase, I'm not going to put up with this, back to another time, another place. And when I did that with people, at first they might go to something when they're like teenager, maybe then childhood, a situation, then maybe at some point earlier than that. And other times people would go back to a scene of a life in which they looked differently, they had a different body, but they had a sense that it was them. And I've had those experiences myself, and it's fallen in the category of past life therapy. So whether you believe in reincarnation or not, there's millions of people that do, and in instances that I've had worked with people, going back and seeing themselves in a different body with a different mindset, having a different life story, but maybe a related theme, they benefited because they began to realize, I am not this, I am that which is aware of this, that knows this, and in this case, the story. So in terms of, and in essence, and I would say, using a word from this period of time, Halloween month, that if you don't learn to disidentify from your story, you may be haunted by it, or you may haunt others. Now, in terms of the haunting others, a friend of mine went to on vacation to Cape May, quaint beach town, beautiful. It was in the summer, and she was told that some people have said the house is haunted. And so when she got there, at some point in a day or so into the trip, there would be these loud noises in the attic. There would be this disruptive sounds. And she asked me to check it out. And using the training I had with Bill Baldwin, Dr. William Baldwin, regarding dealing with this type of phenomenon, I tuned into the situation and I found that there was an old curmudgeon, that is Victorian man, who was a kind of a cynical, complaining kind of older person, hence a curmudgeon. And he didn't like some of what was being said and done by my friend's granddaughter and niece. And so what he did, he would make noises. And in this case, the situation was that my friend's, I think it was her niece, was calling her girlfriend, and she was a lesbian, and they were talking on the phone, and that's when these disruptions would happen. So when I tuned in to the situation, I basically said to this earthbound, this is what the category we call earthbound spirit, I said, do you really want to stay living here, with people coming in and going, renting the place for, vacations, and they clash with your values? Is that what you want? Why don't you look to the light that we die into, like in the near-death experiences, people have talked about the light, and see if you see a loved one in there. It must be time for you to consider leaving this place. And then, bada bing, bada boom, and in an instant, as I had said this, I sensed he was gone. So when I talked to my friend the next day, she said everything was different. And then the day after that and the rest of the week, no incidents of this happened. So in terms of ourselves, if we stay identified with the story, as in my own experience, I found myself at various times in past life therapy trainings, like with Brian Weiss, psychiatrist Brian Weiss, or psychologist Roger Woolger, who both employed these techniques. And whether they're psychodramas or whatever they are, story is the issue. The story, the story, the story, and learning to transcend the story and alter the story as we need to. And so what I discovered, one instance, I saw myself as a priest who was being persecuted by the Nazis, taken away to a concentration camp. In another instance, I saw myself as a druidic priest of some sort. In another instance, in the same regression, I saw myself as a Roman soldier who believed in Christ and was bringing my soldiers under my command into Christianity. And in all instances, I had an anger at God for not protecting these people who I had brought into the fold, whether it was Druidic or whether it was Roman and Christian, or whether it was the Catholic priest who had lost his faith with the Nazis taking over. So it seemed in that regard that kernel idea was propelling me into one lifetime after another. And there's a lot of these cases that I could discuss with you. But anyway, that's not the key. The key is to learn to disidentify from the story so you can alter it and realize you are not the story. You are that which knows or is aware of the story. So this week, I want you to take some time to really learn to stop, take a breath, and tell yourself, breathing in, I step out of this story, breathing out and into my glory of the paradise of my true self, my true nature as the light of consciousness. So I'll see you next week. Have a good week.